Those of you that have been following my channel for a long time know that I've been steadily transforming every vanilla structure in Minecraft, but it can't have escaped your notice I've ignored potentially the biggest one, the Nether Fortress. It's incredibly old in terms of Minecraft's history, and there's a few reasons why I've been avoiding it. The first one is, it's so massive. The task itself of taking even a portion of what I'm showing you here and transforming it into something is incredibly difficult. Not only that, but if you're doing this in survival, you've got to fight the mobs, not fall in the lava, but the biggest problem is that it's randomly generated, meaning that it just isn't consistent enough. A jungle temple will be the same throughout. So these are all issues we're going to have to tackle in this transformation video. So let's begin. The first thing to do is find a nether fortress. Now this won't be hard, but finding the right one is difficult, and we're going to be making some changes, and I mean a lot of changes. We need to prepare this area before we're even ready to transform anything. We need to fight the random generation problems that occur within the Nether Fortress. We need to fill in the gaps and alter bits which didn't really form correctly. A lot of the time, it's when it hits netherrack or the other terrain around it, it seems to just halt where it is. So you'll see on the tower there, it didn't actually have a floor, so we just extended it down to the bottom. This will occur on pretty much any pillar that hits terrain. Some bits may not even be connected when they clearly should be. That bit of hallway just stops, and then there's just a new tower bit there. So we just added some nether brick to create one large structure to bring it all together and make this one coherent fortress. One thing that I want to point out is in this transformation video, I want to keep the theme of a nether fortress. I don't want to take it out of the nether, I don't want to change the block palette, I want it to remain the same structure, just transformed into something that looks a lot better. So we're going to continue preparing the area, and as you can see, things are starting to look nicer already, just a bit neater, and this stage in itself will take hours to do. I know we're using World Edit and that still took us a long time, so this project is not for the faint of heart. However, making sure that it's all neat and tidy is essential to making sure that the structure is going to be what you want at the end. On our design, we had this long hallway that just stopped right here, so we thought this is going to be the staircase up to our nether fortress. We're only going to transform half of the fortress that we've got here, and it's very important that you define where your boundaries are, because otherwise it could end up going all the way across the nether. So as you can see, we're deleting everything that we're not going to need and replacing it with a half slab staircase. But we didn't want it to go straight up and then just be a really odd structure. So what we decided to do was have a slight ledge halfway in between our staircase to give it a break in the shape of our staircase. So once we'd got that, we needed to make this look better. It's all solid nether brick, and it's not a bad idea to take as much nether brick as possible because we're going to be using it as the building block later on. So how do we make this look good? Well, we need to add some arches. Now that's easy to do in creative, but you're going to have to make sure you don't fall in lava if you're doing this in survival. Adding lots of arches was important, and it's pretty much the single most important feature of this nether fortress. Even in vanilla, the arches are what make it definable. So we added even extra ones to make sure that it went smoothly into our nether fortress. So the way we decided to detail this was using red nether brick as our primary contrast color, but unfortunately for the viewing experience, it ends up being a very dark build, so it's very important to try and light it up. Glowstone isn't the prettiest block, and sea lantern works okay. However, the sea lantern can be a little distracting. Your eyes tend to focus on those white dots instead of the nice structure of the arches. It's just something to consider. Lighting up a build like this is incredibly difficult in something like the Nether, which is incredibly dark as it is, and it's got glowstone and lava to compete with as well. So the simplicity of the detailing is what's important here. We've got an indent on the pillars, we've got a nice lamp that gives it light and a bit of detail surrounding it, and a red nether brick outline. But this is only one segment. We've now got to decide what we're going to do with the rest of this place, and I would suggest working on it in portions. So this segment here, we're going to bring any diagonal that goes down into terrain and turn that into a staircase in itself. It doesn't necessarily mean that it'll ever be used, but it just makes the transformation look a lot nicer. We're going to curve all of these rigid edges and make them seem like one fluid platform, bringing them all together and filling in any holes, but keeping some of the original windows and features of it, such as the little balcony there, and all of the interior remains roughly the same as long as it's not been filled in. But what do we put on top of this? Because it's just one ledge and it's off to the side, it's not going to be the main feature of the Nether Fortress. What we thought we'd put here is a big nether wart farm. There's lots of things that we can do, and we need to again set our boundaries, which is why we removed that bit on the end. We could spend hours and hours transforming every little bit, but you need to cut it off at some point. We decided to add a nether brick staircase fence all the way round above the red nether brick. Oh boy, that's a mouthful. But that's because we wanted to segment this bit off from the rest of the build. This is more like an accompanying build rather than a feature in itself. So we added random patches of soul sand with nether warts on them, and these little circular shrines also with nether wart on them, and also a nether wart tree, using for the first time the nether wart block. It surprisingly worked quite well as a replacement leaf block for that tree. It's the only tree in the entire fortress, and it just accompanied this odd little side section to the fortress. This is, as I said, not intended to be a main feature. In fact, this is more of a space filler than anything else, but underneath you've got plenty of interior space to work with now that it's all one giant platform. So now we need to move on to the rest of the build, which is going to be the main feature of this video. So let's start by working on the pillars. Much like the pillars on the left hand side, we need to make sure that these look fantastic, and you may need to add pillars where they weren't present before. If you remember, the staircase that we made was one giant block of nether brick, and this is the example of archway that we're going to make. It's got two simple layers and ends in a red nether brick archway. So this is going to be repeated many times throughout the transformation, so pay attention if you are going to undertake this task. This is how I would tackle the pillars to do them. So we've got one layer, and then underneath the contrasting red layer. One of the biggest issues you face with transforming a nether brick fortress is that it's all the same color, and it's a dark color, so everything blends into one and it's quite hard to distinguish. But we also want to keep the fact that it's a nether brick fortress, so having those two contrasting colors of red really help distinguish the features of it. Normally in the nether it's very foggy, so you may not even be able to see all of the fortress at once anyway. You're able to see it all here because I'm using Optifine, so don't worry too much about that. Moving on, we've got all of the pillars set up to be giant archways. This is obviously a big step up, but the actual detailing of this is very simple. You'll notice they're different from the staircase that we made earlier, and that's intentional. We want these to seem bigger, grander, more important. This is where your eye is going to be drawn. And don't be afraid to edit any of the terrain or existing structure as you go along. We prepared as much as we could at the start of this project, but there's always going to be unforeseen complications, such as this bit that juts out into nothing. It's got no purpose, it's got no use, let's just get rid of it. We also need to continue transforming all of these arches. Obviously we're doing this in creative, so you need to be careful of mobs. Now if you want to see what it looks like when Grian messes up World Edit 100 times in a row, take a look at this. Flash, 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 flash. Nailed it. Well anyway, I just used World Edit to make this work for us in a faster sense, but I messed up so much that it almost didn't matter. We need to continue changing all of the pillars, and this will take hours in itself. I wanted to keep some of the features of the original, which is why that one just juts out into nothing. But all of these archways need to be transformed to keep it all consistent. However, some of them will be at corner angles, so you will need to adapt it so that it does turn at 90 degrees when you come to it, and if you've got World Edit, you have to do a little bit of fiddling around to get that to work. While we're making good progress, there's still a long way to go. I did choose a particularly large nether fortress. You may indeed want to go for one slightly smaller. So let's move on. You'll notice that I left this giant pillar intentionally. It's the only one of its kind in my nether fortress that I found. We're going to turn this into a giant pillar with a torch on top. Not a real fire, but with a stained glass clay one. So we made the shape of it consistent all the way around the edge, making it more circular. When we first had it, it was slightly off on one side. You have to remember that this generation is so old, like years and years old. It hasn't been touched, I believe, in a long time. So you have to kind of give it some leeway when you come across this poor generation. At the bottom, we're going to add a big base circular layer, again made out of nether brick, but you should have tons of it available by now with everything that's been destroyed. So we've got the base circular layer, but we're also going to add a second one. This just makes it nice and tiered up to the main pillar itself. You've got to make sure that they are on the bottom third. Both of these should only make up 1/3 of the entire pillar. If they are too tall, it may not look as grand. So we put a red nether brick ring around both of those layers, and we're now going to make our way to the top, where we may even want to give it a little bit more height. But the nether is actually rather short, so you do want to make sure you have space for your pretend fire once you've got it. Detailing it is a very simple affair. As with the pillars and the archways, we've just got that simple indent with the red backing behind it. You may also want to consider finding a way of lighting this up. It is difficult to see the details without the light. On the bottom base layers, you may want to do something similar, but just have it more open and have larger red areas available to look at. This just makes the base layer feel more solid than its pillar counterpart. We're maintaining a very simple detail to this entire project. Because the nether fortress is so large and quite compact, over detailing it could be a big mistake. We want to keep it nice and elegant. So now it's time to work on the top, where we're going to have our fake fire. So we're just going to create a little ring where we're going to designate where the fire begins and start placing some stained glass. We want to start with orange, which is going to be the predominant colour of our fire. You need to make sure this goes nice and tall, which is why we needed to make sure that there was enough space for the roof of the nether so that we could actually fit that in there. On the inside of the orange, we want to place some yellow glass, and this is to give it the progression of flame colours that we have, and then at the top we want even less red stained glass. And all of that should equal a nice fire. We've actually made this fire jet outwards, so it's more like a cone, instead of going inwards like a traditional flame would. It's up to you how you want this fire to look. Less like a candle, more like a jet of flame is the look we were going for. However, you may prefer some sort of candle look or to even use real fire. But if we take a step back, you can see that this is a real feature of the nether fortress. However, it's not too dominating because it's off to the side. What is going to be dominating is the bits in the middle that we're going to get to probably last. So if we go into the center, you'll notice that we had a spawner which we didn't touch. We didn't exactly know what to do, and it presented quite a problem. We wanted to be able to have it to be used as a farm, but we also wanted it to look nice. We opted to make it look nice rather than make it practical, so that's a way up that you need to make when you've done it. We obviously just disabled the spawner altogether. So we decided that we were just going to give this pillar shape and leave it as it was. We weren't going to even give it detail in the same way that we did everything else with the red nether brick. We were just going to keep it one solid pillar. That was just by design, and it's completely flexible what you do with it. The top, however, presented, as I said, the problem. We wanted to make it look nice, and we tried several designs before settling on one of the original ones that we made over on the Nether Wart farm, which was this very small circular shrine type thing. We didn't want the mob spawner to be out in the open. We wanted to give it a pride of place, seeing especially as it sits directly in the center of all of our very grand archways, and the pillar itself seems a little bit more important because of the lack of detail on it. So we can take a little bit of a closer look to see the detail, but it is exactly the same as the Nether Wart farm that we did earlier. It's got 4 pillars, and it just has some very simple staircase arches, and it's actually a square. Although it looks circular, that's just the trick of the build on it. Anyway, let's move on. So I touched on earlier that we needed to do something about the lighting. Well, light is obviously a big problem, so we laid lots of glowstone tracks all the way through our walkways. This was to try and give as much hidden light as possible to the build. It's very difficult to make the lighting work in the Nether, especially as it's naturally very, very foggy. Right, so let's go on to the main feature. We've got a couple more platforms to work on, and I didn't actually know what to do with them before we started this project. What we ended up doing was combining them into one large platform and creating some staircases between them and doing our feature of red nether brick outline. This is just to bring it all together. What do we do with these giant faces of flat surface? Well, because we've got all of these pillars, we're going to add some more arches, and I apologize for the very, very poor camera angles. I had a hard time navigating this very cramped area. But what we're going to do is some sort of very Moria style pillars, but integrated into the wall itself. They go quite deep back, but are very, very tall. They're also quite simple, so it takes a while to carve these out of the giant blocks of nether brick, but it makes this really, really wonderful effect, especially with the sheer height of these archways. And if you wanted to, you could even stick some lava flowing out of them, which would not only help give it light, but give it more color contrast. I only added lava on some of these builds, so they are imitating the archways of the walkways, but they're much smaller and much taller. So that's what they look like when they're finished, but we've got an awful lot of these to make. On the left hand side you can see that I added lava and it was slightly different. Each one may end up slightly different. You have to work to the space that you've got. We're going to be making an awful lot of these, and I must admit that this transformation video ends up being a repeat of different parts, and there's a very simple explanation for that. The Nether Fortress itself is a repeat of multiple parts that are predetermined. So all we have to do is define those segments into definite transformations and apply them to each one. That way it's a very simple, elegant transformation from one to the other, and this can be applied to the many infinite variations of nether brick fortresses that there are. After making that last archway, this bit of terrain actually wasn't as well placed as originally thought, so we decided to scale that back but still keep it there because we still want to maintain as much of the original structure as possible, but giving as much vision to the Nether Fortress as we can. It just looked odd having that detail of the nice archway being covered up by some terrain. And from my experience in building this, the terrain and the generated structures don't go together very well at all. So as you can see, things are starting to come together, but we still have a few flat surfaces to transform. So we're just going to whiz through the last of detailing these walls because we now know very well how to make all of these archways work, and you'll notice that you have to try and keep it fairly consistent, but it's not always possible. Some of these archways will have to be smaller or larger, you have to adapt to the size, but do attempt to keep it fairly consistent. I do know that taking large chunks out of a solid nether brick block is going to take a long time, so you've got to make sure that you're prepared to undertake this challenge if you're going to do it. It's an exceedingly long time to make. We had creative mode, we had world edit, we had all of the builder's tools access to us, and 3 people working on this, and it still took over 5 hours to make. That is a huge amount of time for a single project. However, as you can see, it's starting to become worth it. This is still a nether fortress, but there's still something missing. And it took me a while to come up with what. And what would a nether fortress be without a nether portal? So that's what we decided the main feature would be. And what better place to put it than on top of this main segment here. We're even going to attach it to the roof of the nether itself. Because it's so shallow, we can just sort of connect it and make it seem like one fluid fortress that goes from the top to the bottom of the nether and brings it all together. So for this portal, I'm going to be using a trick that I did a video on a while ago, where you use the layers in front of it to give it shape. It's actually one big rectangle, but by producing the shape in front, we can trick people into thinking that that is the actual nether portal itself. So I've got this big ovular shape as close to a oval as possible. Obviously it's Minecraft, so it will be a little bit square here and there, and then we need to detail this and give it some structure in itself. So we decided to add 2 pillars either side of the portal, trying our best not to actually cover it up in itself, and then try and attach it to the roof of the nether, which is actually more difficult than it sounds. It's quite hard to attach something to the terrain like that and make it seem like a natural transition. So what we ended up doing was editing a lot of the roof itself to match where it came into contact. So just be careful of falling lava, that is bound to happen every now and again, but we've managed to make this portal look really good. It's starting to really form a shape, and again the detailing matches the large archways that we've done previously in this build. As you can see, everything is fairly consistent. We've got the red nether brick and the nether brick working together to bring us the contrast against the purple. It all looks like it fits in the nether itself. So we decided to add 2 little towers just in front of the portal to try and give it less of an odd shape within the structure of the fortress itself. When it was just freestanding, it almost looked a bit lonely, but we did struggle to make this all fit on the platform and still allow movement of people from one end to the other. But some simple archways through the pillars fixed that no problem. Whew! So, we're nearly at the end. Believe it or not, we're not finished. I want to remove all of the freestanding glowstone. Not because we need the light there, but because it's not a particularly attractive thing and we can do something much nicer. But we are almost at the end of the project. This is really just the icing on the cake. We are so close. Underneath here, what I want to make is a hanging lantern that's full of glowstone in itself. So we're still going to have the glowstone from the ceiling producing some form of light, even though the light itself will not be in any useful context. So using coal block, we just created these organic looking lanterns that will hang down, making sure that they are nice and long and match the scale of the fortress that we've just made, and then fill them with glowstone. No glass is necessary, and there's some fences for details. We then went ahead and copy pasted those all over the roof, and trying not to spam them too much, just a few well placed lanterns did the trick. and all it did was really bring the whole thing together. It just removed that rather ugly looking glowstone that was just free floating on the roof and added a proper structure to it. So there's only one more thing left to say, and that's thank you very, very much for watching. This has been the longest transformation that we have ever attempted. It took over 6 hours to make, or 5 hours, somewhere, I don't even know. But then this video is almost half an hour long. The longest transformation ever. Please don't ask me ever to do this again, but I've done it. The very requested Nether Brick Fortress. A big thank you to Pearlescent Moon and Avox for sticking through this with me and spending hours producing this Nether Fortress. Now, I do not expect many people will attempt this, but hopefully you've now got some idea on how to tackle a project like this. You'll see that the archways are all the same replica, and how to use the different platforms in various different ways and how you can adapt them into the shape that you want. If we look at how this used to look at the start of the video, there's quite a dramatic change, but the layout is exactly the same, which is what is intended on a transformation video. I can't thank you enough. If you've reached the end of these 26 minutes of watching me place nether brick after nether brick after nether brick and world editing, I am absolutely astounded. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this video, everyone. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.